The Great Hall of the Valanthi Confederation stood silent. 7 species had built this place together. They had carved it from the heart of an asteroid and filled it with the symbols of their unity. Golden banners hung from the ceiling. Crystal sculptures caught the light from 1,000 floating lamps. For 300 years, this hall had been the center of galactic civilization. Now it felt like a tomb. High Chancellor Morath stood at the center of the speaking platform. He was old, even by Valanthi standards. His scales had turned from bright blue to a dull gray. His 4 eyes, once sharp and full of fire, now looked tired. He had led the Confederation through its greatest golden age. Now he would watch it die. The Kreth have taken the Orion sector, he said. His voice was flat. There was no point in hiding the truth anymore. Our fleets there have been destroyed. 60 million citizens are now under enemy occupation. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The Orion sector had been their breadbasket. Its agricultural worlds fed half the Confederation. Losing it meant slow starvation for billions. What of the relief fleet? Asked Ambassador Keth of the Mirandi. She was a tall creature with 4 arms and skin like polished bronze. Her people had been warriors once, before they joined the Confederation. Now they were scholars and artists. They had forgotten how to fight. They all had. Gone, Morath said simply. Supreme Commander Vorthax caught them at the Nexus Gate. 300 ships, 40,000 crew, all lost. The hall fell silent again. 300 ships. It had taken them 2 years to build that fleet. More 2 years of stripping resources from every world, of melting down monuments and museums to feed the war factories. And the Kreth had destroyed it in a single afternoon. How many ships do we have left? Asked a voice from the back. It belonged to a small creature with gray fur and large black eyes. The Teth were the smallest of the Confederation species. They were also the most practical. Morath did not want to answer. The number was shameful. It was a death sentence. But his people deserved the truth. 412 combat vessels, he said. Perhaps another 100 support ships. That is all. 400 ships against the Kreth Dominion. The Dominion had started this war with 3,000 warships. Even after 15 years of fighting, even after all the blood the Confederation had spilled, would the enemy still had over 1,000 vessels ready for battle? The math was simple. The math was death. Then we must surrender, said Ambassador Ven of the Solari. His people were tall and thin, with skin that glowed faintly in the dark. They were philosophers and dreamers. They had never wanted this war. We cannot win. We can only choose how we lose. Surrender gives our people a chance to survive. Survival under Kreth rule is not survival, Keth replied. Her 4 hands curled into fists. You have seen what they do to conquered peoples, slavery, labor camps, mass executions of any who resist. Death is better than that existence. Death is never better than life, Ven said. While we live, there is hope. The dead hope for nothing. The argument continued. It was the same argument they had been having for 5 years, ever since the war turned against them. Surrender or fight. Submit or die. There were no other options. There had never been any other options. Morath let them argue. He knew it did not matter. Whether they surrendered or fought, the result would be the same. The Kreth did not want peace. They wanted conquest. They wanted to rule the galaxy alone. Every species that was not Kreth was either a slave or an enemy. That was their way. That had always been their way. The Confederation had tried diplomacy at the start. They had offered trade agreements and territorial concessions. They had offered to share technology and resources. The Kreth had responded by burning the diplomatic vessel with all hands aboard. Then they had invaded. 15 years. 15 years of war. 15 years of watching everything they had built crumble to dust. The Confederation had once ruled 1,000 worlds. Now they held less than 100. Soon they would hold none. There is one option we have not considered, said a quiet voice. The arguing stopped. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. It was a young Valanthi named Sirath. He wore the uniform of a fleet admiral, though his rank was new. All the experienced admirals were dead. Sirath had earned his position by being one of the few who survived. We have asked every species in known space for help, Sirath continued. Every species except one. Morath felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew what Sirath was going to say. He had thought about it himself many times. He had always rejected the idea as foolish, desperate, embarrassing. The humans, Cyrith said. The reaction was immediate. Laughter came from several delegates. The others shook their heads in disbelief. A few looked confused, as if they had never heard the word before. The humans, Keth said. Her voice was full of scorn. The primitives from the outer rim? You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, Cyrith said. They have ships. They have weapons. They have soldiers. They are the only species in this region of the galaxy that has not been conquered or allied with the Kreth. There is a reason for that, Ven said. They are irrelevant. Their technology is so primitive that the Kreth do not consider them worth conquering. Their ships still use kinetic weapons. They have barely mastered shield technology. A single Kreth cruiser could destroy their entire fleet. Perhaps, Cyrith said, but perhaps not. We know very little about them. They keep to themselves. They do not trade with other species. They do not share their technology. We assume they are weak because they are different from us. But assumption is not knowledge. I have seen their ships, Keth said. I passed through their space once, many years ago. Their vessels are ugly things, dark and heavy, covered in thick plates of metal. They look like they were built by creatures who had never heard of elegant design. Their weapons are tubes that fire metal projectiles. Metal projectiles. Like something from a primitive age, they would be useless against modern shields. And yet, Sarah said softly, they have survived. They have been in space for 200 years. Every other young species in this region has been conquered or destroyed. The humans remain. That must mean something. The hall fell quiet again. Morith considered Sarath's words. It was true that the humans were a mystery. They had appeared suddenly about 2 centuries ago, exploding out of a small system near the galactic rim. They had colonized a dozen worlds in the first 50 years. Then they had stopped expanding. They had built walls around their space and refused to let anyone in. Traders were turned away. Diplomats were ignored. The humans wanted to be left alone. Most species in the galaxy had decided that the humans were simply afraid. They had seen the great powers of the galaxy and realized they could not compete. So they hid in their corner of space and hoped no one would notice them. The Kreth certainly did not consider them a threat. The Dominion had more important targets to conquer. But Cyrath had a point. Survival was not easy in this galaxy. We species rose and fell constantly. The humans had survived for 2 centuries without allies, without trade, without the protection of any great power. That took strength of some kind. Even if they agreed to help, Morith said slowly, what could they offer? 100 ships? 200? It would not be enough to turn the tide. No, Cyrith agreed, but it might be enough to buy time. Time for our people to evacuate. Time to find a new home beyond Kreth reach. Time for something, anything to change. Morath looked around the hall. He saw despair on every face. These were the leaders of the Confederation, the wisest and most powerful beings of 7 species. And they had no hope left. They were simply waiting to die. Perhaps asking the humans for help was foolish. Perhaps they would refuse, or their help would be worthless. But doing nothing was certain death. Taking a chance was at least a chance. Very well, Morith said. We will send a message to the humans. We will ask for their help. We will offer them whatever they want in return. And we will pray to whatever gods still listen that they answer. The message went out that night. It traveled through relay stations and communication buoys, crossing thousands of light years in a matter of hours. It reached the border of human space and stopped at a checkpoint station. A human officer read the message. He passed it to his commander. The commander passed it to someone else. The message climbed the chain of command, moving from station to ship to colony to the human homeworld itself. 3 days later, a response arrived. Morath read the message in his private chambers. It was short. Humans, he had learned, did not waste words. We are coming, the message said. Admiral Vasquez commands. Fleet strength, 200 vessels. Arrival, 14 standard days. Prepare docking facilities and tactical briefings. We will discuss terms after the battle. 200 ships. Morath did not know whether to laugh or cry. 200 primitive ships against 1,000 Kreth warships. It was like throwing stones at a hurricane. But they were coming. Someone was coming to help. After 15 years of fighting alone, someone had finally answered. Morath allowed himself a moment of hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was more than he had felt in years. 14 days later, The human fleet arrived. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Unconquered Sun and watched the Confederation station grow larger on the view screen. And it was a beautiful structure, she had to admit. All curves and flowing lines like something grown rather than built. The Volanthe had good architects. The bridge around her was busy but calm. Her crew knew their jobs. They did not need to be told what to do. That was the human way. Train hard, trust your people, and let them work. Receiving docking instructions, her communications officer said, "They want us in Bay 7. Bay 7, Vasquez repeated. She looked at the station layout on her tactical display. Bay 7 was the smallest docking area. It was usually reserved for supply ships and maintenance vessels. The Confederation was putting them in the back corner where they would not be noticed. She was not offended. She understood. The humans were an embarrassment. The Great Confederation, with all its technology and wisdom, Ike had been reduced to asking primitives for help. Of course, they wanted to hide that fact. "Take us in," she said, "and tell the fleet to stay sharp. I want everyone ready for action the moment we finish docking." "Yes, Admiral." The Unconquered Sun moved toward the station. Behind it came the rest of the fleet. 200 ships in perfect formation. Destroyers and cruisers and battleships, all painted in the same flat black that absorbed sensor readings. They looked nothing like Confederation vessels. Where Volanthe ships were smooth and elegant, human ships were angular and brutal. They were covered in thick armor plates. They bristled with weapon turrets. They looked like they had been built for one purpose only: war. Vasquez had served in the fleet for 40 years. She had fought in the colonial wars. When human colonies had tried to break away from Earth's government, she had commanded ships against pirates and raiders and rebel factions. She had seen more combat than anyone in this region of space. But this was different. This was not a human problem. This was not her fight. The Confederation had ignored humanity for 2 centuries. They had looked down on human technology. They had laughed at human ships. Now they wanted human help. Part of her wanted to refuse. Part of her wanted to turn the fleet around and go home. Let the Confederation deal with its own problems. Let them learn what happened when they dismissed others as primitives. But she had not become an admiral by being petty. And the Kreth were a threat to everyone. If they conquered the Confederation, they would not stop there. Eventually, they would come for human space. Better to stop them now while there were still allies to fight alongside. The Unconquered Sun entered the docking bay. Magnetic clamps locked onto the hull. The engines powered down. They had arrived. "Admiral," her first officer said, "there is a delegation waiting at the airlock. The Confederation wants to meet with you immediately." "Of course they do," Vasquez said. She straightened her uniform. It was simple and practical, dark blue with silver trim. No medals or decorations. Human officers did not believe in displaying their achievements. The achievements spoke for themselves. "Let them wait 5 minutes," she said. "Then escort them to the briefing room. I want our tactical team present. And get me the latest intelligence on enemy positions." "Yes, Admiral." Vasquez left the bridge and walked through the corridors of her ship. When the Unconquered Sun was not beautiful. Its walls were bare metal. Its floors were grated steel. Everything was functional. Everything was built to survive. She passed crew members as she walked. They nodded to her respectfully, but did not stop working. Human ships did not have time for elaborate protocols. There was always something to do, something to maintain, something to prepare. The briefing room was a simple space with a large table and a holographic display. Vasquez took her seat at the head of the table and waited. A few minutes later, the door opened and the Confederation delegation entered. There were 3 of them. A Volanthe in official robes, presumably a diplomat. A Morandi in military armor, probably their equivalent of a general. And a young Volanthe in a fleet admiral's uniform, which surprised her. Or he looked barely old enough to command a shuttle, let alone a fleet. "Admiral Vasquez," the diplomat said. His voice was formal and cold. "I am Ambassador Tellin. This is General Keth of the Morandi Defense Forces and Admiral Syrath of the Volanthe Fleet. We welcome you to Confederation space." "Thank you," Vasquez said. She did not stand. She did not bow. Human officers did not perform such rituals. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." The delegation exchanged glances. They were not used to being spoken to so directly, but they sat. "Before we begin," Tellin said, "I must express the Confederation's gratitude for your assistance. We know that humanity has no obligation to help us. Your willingness to risk your ships and your people is a great honor. Save the speeches, Vasquez said. Hey, tell me about the enemy. Another exchange of glances. Talon looked uncomfortable. Keth looked annoyed. Only Syrath seemed unsurprised. He leaned forward and activated the holographic display. The Kreth Dominion has approximately 1,000 combat vessels, Syrath said. Their main fleet, under Supreme Commander Vorthax, numbers around 800 ships. They are currently positioned here. He pointed to a spot on the star map. The Arcturus Nebula, our last major stronghold. Vasquez studied the display. The Arcturus Nebula was a cloud of gas and dust surrounding a cluster of habitable worlds. It was defensible, but only barely. The Kreth could approach from multiple angles. Once they broke through the outer defenses, the inner worlds would fall quickly. How many ships do you have? She asked. 412, Syrath said, plus support vessels. Vasquez did the math in her head. 400 Confederation ships plus 200 human ships against 800 Kreth warships. The numbers were bad, but not impossible. She had fought worse odds. What do you know about their tactics? She asked. Standard energy weapon doctrine, Keth said. She spoke grudgingly, as if answering questions from a primitive offended her. Plasma lances and particle beams at range, shield overload at close quarters. They focus fire on one target at a time, overwhelm its shields, destroy it, move to the next. And your defenses? Energy shields, Keth said. Standard configuration. Our ships can absorb approximately 30 seconds of concentrated fire before shield failure. 30 seconds. Vasquez kept her face neutral. But inside she was calculating. 30 seconds was not long. If the Kreth focused 800 ships on one target at a time, they could destroy one Confederation ship every half minute. The entire Confederation fleet would be gone in 3 hours. What about offensive weapons? She asked. Plasma cannons, Keth said. Particle beam arrays, standard galactic armament. How long to destroy a Kreth ship? Keth hesitated. It depends on the size. A cruiser, perhaps 2 minutes of concentrated fire. A battleship, 5 to 7 minutes. Their shields are stronger than ours. Vasquez nodded slowly. The picture was becoming clear. The Confederation had been losing this war because they were outmatched in every way. Their shields were weaker. Their weapons were slower. Their ships died faster and killed slower. It was a simple equation, and the answer was defeat. All right, she said. Here is what is going to happen. When the battle begins, the human fleet will advance first. We will engage the enemy directly. Your ships will hold back and provide support. Absolutely not, Keth said. Her forearms crossed over her chest. You cannot expect us to hide behind you. We are warriors. We will fight. You will die, Vasquez said calmly. Your shields will fail in 30 seconds. Your weapons cannot kill fast enough. If you engage directly, you will be destroyed. If you hold back and support us, you might survive long enough to matter. And what about your ships? Syrath asked. His voice was curious, not hostile. Your shields are even weaker than ours. Our sensors show that your generators are barely functional. The Kreth will destroy you even faster than they would destroy us. Vasquez smiled. It was a thin smile, without warmth. Let me worry about that, she said. The meeting continued for another hour. They discussed fleet positions and communication protocols and emergency procedures. The Confederation delegates grew increasingly frustrated with Vasquez's refusal to explain her battle plan. She told them where to position their ships. She told them when to fire and when to hold. But she did not tell them why. Finally, as the meeting was ending, Syrath asked the question that had been hanging in the air. Admiral, he said, do you truly believe you can win this battle? Your ships are outnumbered 4-1. Your technology is considered primitive by galactic standards. The Kreth have never been defeated in open combat. What makes you think this time will be different? Vasquez stood up. She looked at the young admiral for a long moment. There was something in his eyes that she recognized. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. Admiral Syrath, she said, my people have a saying. The strong do what they can. The weak suffer what they must. But humans are neither strong nor weak. We are stubborn. We do not know how to give up. We do not know how to die quietly. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed billions. We have survived because we refuse to stop fighting. She walked to the door, then turned back. The Kreth think they know how war works. They are about to learn that they know nothing. Then she left. 3 days later, the Kreth fleet arrived. The battle for the Arcturus Nebula was about to begin. When Supreme Commander Vorthax stood on the command deck of the Kreth Dreadnought Eternal Dominion and watched his fleet emerge from hyperspace. 800 warships, the largest armada the Dominion had ever assembled, spread across the darkness like a swarm of metal locusts. Each ship was a masterpiece of Kreth engineering, smooth hulls that deflected sensor beams, powerful shield generators that could absorb almost any attack, weapon arrays that could melt through enemy armor in seconds. This was the fleet that had conquered half the galaxy. This was the force that had brought the mighty Confederation to its knees, and now it was about to finish the job. Vorthax was a large creature, even by Kreth standards. His species were tall and broad, with thick gray skin covered in natural armor plates. Their eyes were small and black, set deep in skulls that could survive impacts that would kill most other beings. They had evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. That philosophy had guided their civilization for 10,000 years. The weak existed to serve the strong. That was the fundamental truth of the universe. The Confederation had forgotten this truth. They had built their society on cooperation and equality, on the foolish belief that different species could work together as partners. They had made themselves weak, and the weak suffered what they must. "Commander," said his tactical officer, a younger Kreth named Drath, "sensors show the enemy fleet assembling near the fourth planet. Approximately 400 vessels." Vorthax made a sound of contempt deep in his throat. 400 ships. And the Confederation had once fielded thousands of warships. Now they had been reduced to this pathetic remnant. It was almost sad. Almost. Configuration? Standard defensive formation, Drath said. They appear to be preparing for a last stand. Of course they were. What else could they do? They had nowhere to run. The Arcturus Nebula was their final refuge. If they lost here, the war was over. The Confederation would cease to exist. Its member species would become slaves of the Dominion, as was proper. Vorthax allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had waited 15 years for this day. 15 years of grinding warfare, of slowly crushing the Confederation's resistance. There had been setbacks along the way. The Confederation had fought harder than expected, but the outcome had never been in doubt. The strong always triumphed over the weak. "Commander," Drath said. His voice had changed slightly. There was a note of confusion in it. "I am detecting additional ships at the edge of the engagement zone." "Reinforcements?" Vorthax felt a flicker of annoyance. Had the Confederation found more allies somewhere? It would not matter in the end, but it might delay his victory. "I do not believe so, Commander. The ships do not match any known Confederation design. They appear to be—" Drath paused, studying his console. "They appear to be human vessels." Vorthax turned to look at his tactical officer. "Human?" "Yes, Commander. Approximately 200 ships. They are positioning themselves at the front of the Confederation formation. Humans." Vorthax searched his memory for information about the species. They were newcomers to the galaxy, having achieved faster-than-light travel only a few centuries ago. They lived on the outer rim, in a small cluster of systems that no one cared about. The Dominion had not bothered to conquer them because they had nothing worth taking. Their technology was primitive. Their military was a joke. They were irrelevant. And yet here they were, flying into a battle that was not their concern. Interesting. "Show me their ships," Vorthax commanded. The main view screen shifted to display the human fleet. Vorthax studied the vessels with professional curiosity. They were ugly things, he decided. Where Kreth ships were smooth and efficient, human ships were angular and crude. They looked like they had been hammered together by creatures who had never heard of proper design principles. And their hulls were covered in thick plates of some dark material. Their weapon turrets looked like simple tubes, probably kinetic cannons of some kind. "Analysis?" he asked. Drath worked at his console for a moment. "Their ships have shield generators, but they are extremely weak. Our weapons could overwhelm them in seconds. Their armor appears to be standard metallic composite. Nothing special. Their weapons are kinetic projectile systems, as expected. Primitive, but functional. What is their purpose here?" "Unknown, Commander. Perhaps the Confederation convinced them to help with promises of territory or resources." Vorthax made another contemptuous sound. The humans had been foolish enough to answer the Confederation's call for help. They had flown across the galaxy to fight in a war they could not win. They would die alongside their new allies, accomplishing nothing. Still, he felt a small measure of respect for them. They had chosen to fight rather than hide. That took courage, even if it was foolish courage. Perhaps he would make their deaths quick as a reward for their bravery. Maintain course, he ordered. We will engage the enemy as planned. Target the human ships first. They are in the vanguard, so they will die first. Once they are destroyed, we will deal with the Confederation remnant. Yes, Commander. The Kreth fleet moved forward. 800 ships in perfect formation, their weapons powering up, their shields reaching full strength. They had done this 1,000 times before. They knew exactly how this battle would go. Across the void, the Confederation fleet watched them come. An Admiral Cyrath stood on the bridge of the Valanthi battleship Starlight's Edge and tried to control his fear. He had commanded ships in combat before, but never anything like this. The enemy fleet was twice the size of their combined forces. The Kreth had better weapons, better shields, better everything. By every calculation, this battle was already lost. And yet Admiral Vasquez had ordered the human fleet to advance. Cyrath watched the human ships on his tactical display. They were moving forward away from the Confederation formation, heading directly toward the approaching Kreth armada. It was suicide. It had to be suicide. No sane commander would throw their ships into the teeth of a superior enemy force. What are they doing? Asked his first officer, a young Valanthi named Talas. Her voice was tight with anxiety. They will be destroyed in the first exchange. I do not know, Cyrath admitted, but Admiral Vasquez seemed confident. Perhaps they know something we do not. What could they possibly know? Their ships are inferior to ours, and our ships are inferior to the Kreth. There is no secret weapon that can change those facts. Cyrath had no answer. He watched the human fleet accelerate, their dark ships forming a wedge pointed directly at the enemy. The unconquered sun was at the tip of the formation, leading the advance. Whatever Admiral Vasquez was planning, she was putting herself at the greatest risk. Open a channel to the human flagship, he ordered. Channel open, Admiral. Admiral Vasquez, this is Admiral Cyrath. The Kreth fleet is preparing to engage, and I strongly recommend you fall back and let our ships absorb the initial bombardment. Your vessels cannot withstand concentrated fire from their weapons. There was a pause, then Vasquez's voice came through the speakers. She sounded calm, almost relaxed. Thank you for your concern, Admiral, but we have a plan. Just stay in position and be ready to support us when the shooting starts. What plan? You have not told us anything about your tactical approach. How can we support you if we do not know what you intend to do? Another pause. Admiral Cyrath, do you trust me? The question surprised him. Trust? He did not know this human. He had met her once, briefly. She had been cold and dismissive, refusing to explain her strategy, treating the Confederation delegation like children who needed to be told what to do without understanding why. But she had come. When no one else in the galaxy would help, the humans had answered the call. That had to mean something. I trust you, Admiral, Cyrath said, though he was not entirely sure it was true. Good. Then trust me now. Keep your ships back. Do not engage unless I give the order. And when you see what happens next, do not panic. Everything is going according to plan. The channel closed. Cyrath stared at his tactical display, watching the human fleet approach the enemy. They would be in weapons range in less than 2 minutes. Admiral, Talas said, what should we do? Cyrath took a deep breath. We follow orders. Hold position. All ships prepare for combat but do not engage unless directed. Across the Confederation fleet, similar conversations were happening. Officers questioned the plan, and captains worried about the primitive aliens leading their defense. Everyone watched the human ships advance and wondered if they were witnessing courage or madness. On the Kreth flagship, Vorthax watched the same scene with growing amusement. They are charging directly at us, Drath reported, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. No evasive maneuvers. No attempt to use the nebula for cover. They are flying straight into our guns. Brave but stupid, Vorthax said. The Confederation must have promised them something extraordinary to convince them to throw their lives away like this. Perhaps they do not understand how powerful our weapons are. Perhaps, or perhaps they are simply fools. Vorthax leaned forward in his command chair. All ships prepare to engage. Target the human vessels. Full power to forward weapons. When I want them destroyed in the first volley. The Kreth fleet responded instantly. 800 ships adjusted their positions, bringing their primary weapons to bear on the approaching human formation. Plasma lances and particle beam arrays powered up, their energy readings climbing to maximum. The accumulated firepower of the fleet was staggering. It could crack planets. It could shatter moons. It could certainly destroy 200 primitive ships. Range to enemy, Vorthax asked. 20,000 kilometers and closing. They will be in optimal weapons range in 30 seconds. Vorthax watched the human ships grow larger on his view screen. He could see details now. The ugly angular hulls, the thick armor plates, the crude weapon turrets. They looked like relics from an ancient age, preserved in a museum and somehow brought to life. After 10 seconds to weapons range. The moment was almost here. The first blow of this final battle. Once the human ships were destroyed, the Confederation would lose whatever hope they had. They would see that even their allies could not protect them. They would understand that resistance was futile. Weapons range achieved. All batteries have target locks. Vorthax allowed himself a smile. Fire. 800 ships fired at once. Thousands of plasma lances and particle beams lanced across the void, converging on the human formation. The darkness of space lit up like a star being born. The energy output was enough to power a civilization for a year. It was enough to burn through any shield ever created. The beams struck the human vanguard. Shields flickered and died almost instantly, exactly as expected. The weak human shields could not handle even a fraction of the incoming fire. They collapsed in less than 3 seconds. Across the Kreth fleet, officers cheered. Across the Confederation fleet, hearts sank. The human shields had failed. Now the ships themselves would be destroyed. Now the slaughter would begin. But the slaughter did not come. Vorthax stared at his view screen in confusion. The human ships were still there. They were still advancing. Their shields were gone, yes, but the ships themselves were untouched. The plasma and particle beams that should have torn through their hulls were splashing harmlessly against their armor. What is happening? He demanded. Why are they not destroyed? Drath was staring at his console with wide eyes. I do not understand, Commander. Our weapons are hitting them, but they are not penetrating. The armor is absorbing the energy. Impossible. No armor can withstand concentrated plasma fire. The heat alone should melt through any material. I am reading the data correctly, Commander. The human ships are still at full integrity. Our weapons are having no effect. Vorthax felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was a feeling he had not experienced in many years. A feeling he had thought he would never experience again. It was uncertainty. On the bridge of the unconquered sun, Admiral Vasquez watched the Kreth weapons fire wash over her fleet like rain on stone. The ship shuddered slightly as billions of joules of energy struck the hull. But that was all. The armor held. It had been designed to hold. Damage report, she said calmly. Minimal, Admiral, her first officer replied. Our hull temperature is elevated, but within acceptable limits. All systems operational. No casualties. And the rest of the fleet? Same across all ships. The enemy weapons are ineffective against our armor. Vasquez nodded. She had expected this, but it was still satisfying to see the theory proven in practice. The galaxy had made a mistake. Everyone had made a mistake. They had assumed that energy weapons and energy shields were the only way to fight. For thousands of years, every spacefaring species had followed the same path. Develop shields to block energy weapons. Develop weapons to overwhelm shields. It was an endless cycle, with each side trying to outpower the other. Humanity had looked at that cycle and decided it was stupid. Shields were elegant, yes. They could block almost any attack if they were strong enough. But they required enormous power. They failed catastrophically when overwhelmed. They were a single point of failure that could doom an entire ship. Armor was different. Armor did not require power. It did not fail all at once. It could absorb damage that would have destroyed a shielded vessel. It was heavy and ugly and primitive, but it worked. For 2 centuries, human engineers had worked on armor technology, while the rest of the galaxy ignored them. They had developed alloys that could withstand temperatures that would melt diamond. They had created composite materials that dispersed energy across the entire hull. They had built ships that could fly through the heart of a star and come out the other side. The shield generators on human ships were a joke. Everyone agreed. What no one understood was that human ships did not need shields. The shields were just a disguise, a way to look like everyone else. The real defense was the 10 meters of advanced armor plating that covered every human vessel. The Kreth were firing energy weapons at ships designed to laugh at energy weapons. They might as well have been throwing rocks at a mountain. Admiral, the communications officer said, Admiral Sirath is requesting an explanation. He wants to know why our ships are still intact. Vasquez smiled. Tell him the explanation is coming. All ships advance to weapons range. Prepare main batteries. The human fleet surged forward. The Kreth continued to fire, pouring endless streams of energy into the advancing formation. It did nothing. The human ships kept coming, their dark hulls glowing slightly from the absorbed heat but otherwise untouched. On the Eternal Dominion, a Vorthax was screaming orders. Increase power to weapons. Target their engines. Find a weak point. We are at maximum power, Commander, Drath replied. His voice was shaking. There is no weak point. Their armor is uniform across the entire hull. Our weapons cannot penetrate. Then ram them! All ships, prepare for ramming attacks. Commander, if we ram them, we will destroy ourselves as well as them. I do not care. They cannot be allowed to reach us. But it was too late. The human fleet had reached weapons range. Admiral Vasquez gave the order. All ships, open fire! The human fleet responded with a sound that no one in the galaxy had heard in 10,000 years. It was the thunder of kinetic weapons. Massive railguns, each one capable of accelerating a tungsten projectile to a significant fraction of the speed of light. The projectiles were not elegant. They were not sophisticated. They were simply chunks of dense metal moving very, very fast. They struck the Kreth fleet like the fist of an angry god. The first volley hit the leading Kreth ships. Their shields flared, trying to absorb the impact. But shields were designed to disperse energy, not stop mass. A plasma beam could be spread across the shield surface, its energy distributed until it was harmless. A tungsten slug moving at relativistic velocity could not be dispersed. It was pure kinetic force, and it went straight through. The first Kreth dreadnought took 4 hits in rapid succession. The slugs punched through its shields like they were not there. They tore through the hull, leaving holes the size of buildings. The ship's reactor containment failed. There was a brief flash of light, and then the dreadnought was gone, converted to expanding gas and debris. The entire engagement lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds from the first human shot to the ship's destruction. A vessel that had taken years to build, that had survived dozens of battles, that was considered nearly invincible by Kreth standards. Gone in 4 seconds, and the human fleet kept firing. Vorthax watched in horror as ship after ship died around him. His fleet, his invincible fleet, was being torn apart. The human weapons were unlike anything he had ever seen. They did not care about shields. They did not care about evasive maneuvers. They simply punched through everything in their path. Fall back, he shouted. All ships, fall back! Emergency withdrawal! But the human fleet was not going to let them escape. They pressed forward, on all their railguns, cycling continuously, each shot another death sentence for a Kreth vessel. Cruisers, destroyers, battleships. They all died the same way. Their shields useless, their armor insufficient, their crews never even understanding what had killed them. On the Starlight's edge, Admiral Sirath watched the destruction with an expression of pure disbelief. By the stars, Talas whispered. They are destroying them. The humans are actually destroying them. Sirath could not speak. He had seen many battles. He had watched friends die. He had witnessed atrocities and miracles. But he had never seen anything like this. The Kreth fleet, the terror of the galaxy, the unstoppable force that had conquered 1,000 worlds was being slaughtered. One ship every few seconds, each death marked by a brief flash of light. And the human weapons were not beautiful. They were not elegant. They were brutally, horrifically effective. Admiral, Talas said. Admiral Vasquez is on the channel. Sirath forced himself to focus. Put her through. Vasquez's voice came through the speakers. She still sounded calm, as if this was just another day at work. Admiral Sirath, the enemy is breaking. We are pursuing. If your ships would like to join us, now would be a good time. Sirath found his voice. Yes, we will join you. All ships advance. Support the human fleet. The Confederation fleet moved forward, but there was little for them to do. The battle was already over. The Kreth fleet, what remained of it, was in full retreat. Ships that had once struck fear into every species in the galaxy were now fleeing for their lives, chased by primitive humans in ugly ships with crude weapons. On the Eternal Dominion, Vorthax screamed in fury and despair. His fleet was dying. His officers were panicking. Everything he had built, everything he had accomplished, was crumbling around him. How? He shouted at no one in particular. How is this possible? They are primitives. Their technology is ancient. How can they be destroying us? No one had an answer. No one could explain how 200 primitive ships were defeating 800 advanced warships. It made no sense. It violated every law of warfare that the Kreth had ever known. But it was happening, and there was nothing Vorthax could do to stop it. The battle continued for another 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, the human fleet destroyed 112 Kreth vessels. They damaged another 200. And they drove the rest into headlong retreat, fleeing back the way they had come. When it was over, Admiral Vasquez stood on her bridge and surveyed the wreckage. Broken ships drifted through space, their hulls torn open, their crews dead. The nebula was filled with debris and radiation. Casualties, she asked. None, Admiral. We did not lose a single ship. None. 200 ships against 800, and the humans had not lost a single vessel. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. Contact Admiral Cyrath. Tell him the battle is over. Tell him the Confederation just won the war. Behind her, through the view screen, the surviving Kreth ships disappeared into the distance. They had come to finish off the Confederation. They had expected an easy victory. They had been wrong. The aftermath of the battle was a kind of silence that Admiral Cyrath had never experienced before. He stood on the observation deck of the Starlight's Edge and stared out at the debris field that had once been the greatest military force in the known galaxy. Kreth warships, broken and burning, drifted through the void like leaves scattered by a storm. Their lights were dead. Their weapons were cold. Their crews were gone. It should have been impossible. Every calculation, every simulation, every prediction had said the same thing. The Confederation would lose. The numbers were clear. The technology gap was real. The Kreth were stronger, faster, better armed. They should have won, but they had not won. They had been destroyed, and Cyrath could not understand how. Admiral! It was Talus, his first officer. She had been standing nearby, unequally silent, equally stunned. The human flagship is requesting permission to dock. Admiral Vasquez wishes to meet with you. Cyrath nodded slowly. Grant permission. Prepare a reception in the main conference room. Should I summon the other senior officers? No, just me. I think I need to understand this before I try to explain it to anyone else. Talus looked at him with concern in her eyes. She was young, but she was smart. She knew that something fundamental had changed today. The universe they thought they understood had revealed itself to be something entirely different. Cyrath made his way through the corridors of his ship. The crew members he passed were subdued, speaking in whispers if they spoke at all. They had witnessed a miracle. They were still trying to process what it meant. The conference room was a large space with a long table and comfortable chairs. It was designed for diplomatic meetings, with artwork on the walls and a view of the stars through a wide window. Today, the view was of destruction. Wreckage filled the space outside, catching the light of the distant sun. The door opened and Admiral Vasquez entered. She was alone, which surprised Cyrath. He had expected her to bring officers or guards, but she walked in by herself, her hands clasped behind her back, her face calm. Admiral Cyrath, she said, thank you for receiving me. Thank you for saving us, Cyrath replied. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions. Finally, Cyrath could not wait any longer. How? He asked. How did you do it? Vasquez tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? You know what I mean. Your shields collapsed in seconds. Our sensors confirmed it. The Kreth weapons destroyed your shields almost instantly. By every measure we understand, your ships should have been helpless. But they were not. Your ships survived. And then you destroyed the enemy fleet in less than 3 minutes. Cyrath leaned forward. How? Vasquez was quiet for a moment. She seemed to be considering how much to reveal, how to explain something that was apparently obvious to her, but mystifying to everyone else. The answer is simple, she said finally. We never relied on our shields. But shields are essential. They are the only defense against energy weapons. Without shields, any ship would be destroyed in seconds. That is what everyone in this galaxy believes, Vasquez said. That is what everyone has believed for thousands of years. Energy weapons and energy shields, locked in an endless competition. Each side tries to build stronger weapons, stronger shields. The entire philosophy of space combat is based on this idea. Because it works. Does it? Vasquez gestured toward the window, toward the debris field outside. Those ships out there were protected by the most advanced shields in the galaxy. How well did those shields work? Cyrath had no answer. The Kreth shields had been useless against human weapons. They had failed completely. allowing the kinetic projectiles to pass through as if they did not exist. Shields are designed to disperse energy, Vasquez continued. A plasma beam hits the shield, and the energy is spread across the entire surface, weakened until it cannot cause damage. It is an elegant solution, but it only works against energy. And your weapons are not energy. Correct. Our weapons fire physical projectiles, dense metal, accelerated to extremely high velocity. When a projectile hits a shield, the shield tries to disperse the energy. But the projectile is not just energy, it is mass. It has momentum. The shield can absorb some of the kinetic energy, but it cannot stop the projectile itself. The metal passes through, carrying enough force to tear through any hull. Serath felt his mind racing. It was such a simple idea, so obvious now that it was explained. Energy shields were not designed to stop physical objects. They were designed to stop energy weapons because that was what everyone used. For 10,000 years, no one had thought to attack the assumption itself. But your ships, he said, your shields failed. The Kreth weapons should have destroyed you even if your weapons were effective against them. Vasquez smiled slightly. Our shields were never meant to protect us. They were a disguise. A disguise? When humanity first encountered other species, we realized that everyone used the same basic technology. Energy weapons, energy shields. If we had shown up with our actual defensive systems, we would have been seen as a threat. Other species might have allied against us before we were ready. So you pretended to have weak shields. We installed shield generators on our ships because that is what people expected to see. But we never invested in them. We never tried to make them stronger. They were just for show, to make us look like we fit in with the rest of the galaxy. Serath felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had been hiding their true capabilities. For 200 years, they had pretended to be weak, primitive, harmless, and no one had suspected the truth. If your shields were just a disguise, he said slowly, then what is your real defense? Vasquez gestured toward the window, toward her fleet visible in the distance. The human ships were gathered together, their dark hulls unmarked by the battle they had just fought. Armor, she said. We went a different direction. Instead of trying to block energy weapons with shields, we built ships that could absorb energy weapons through physical protection. Armor? Serath struggled with the concept. But armor has been obsolete for thousands of years. Now energy weapons can melt through any metal. No material can withstand concentrated plasma fire. No material that anyone else has developed, Vasquez corrected. Human scientists have been working on armor technology for 2 centuries. We developed alloys and composites that do not exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Materials that can absorb enormous amounts of heat without failing. Materials that disperse energy across the entire hull, preventing any single point from being overwhelmed. She leaned back in her chair. Our ships have 10 meters of advanced armor plating. Every inch of it is designed to absorb energy weapon fire. The Kreth could have fired at us all day, and they would never have penetrated our hulls. 10 meters. Serath tried to imagine it. Confederation ships had perhaps half a meter of hull plating, just enough to protect against micrometeorites and minor impacts. The idea of building 10 meters of armor around a ship was almost absurd. It would be incredibly heavy. It would require enormous engines just to move. It would be expensive beyond measure. But it would work. If the humans had truly developed materials that could withstand energy weapons, then armor made perfect sense. No power requirements, no failure cascade. Just solid protection that could take punishment indefinitely. This is why you never traded with other species, Serath said. This is why you kept to yourselves. You were hiding this technology. We were protecting it, Vasquez said, and we were protecting ourselves. If the Kreth had known what we were capable of, they would have attacked us before we were ready. We needed time to build our fleet, to develop our weapons, to prepare for the day when we would have to fight. And now that day has come. Yes, the Confederation asked for help. We decided it was time. Serath was quiet for a long moment. He was trying to process everything he had learned. The humans had been planning this for centuries. They had watched the galaxy from the shadows, building their strength, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment came, they had revealed themselves in the most dramatic way possible. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it raised a question that Serath was almost afraid to ask. Why did you help us? He said. You could have stayed hidden. The Kreth were not threatening you. You had nothing to gain by revealing yourselves. Vasquez looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed very old. very tired. That is not entirely true, she said. The Kreth would have come for us eventually. Once they finished conquering the Confederation, they would have turned their attention to the rest of the galaxy. We are on their list. Everyone is on their list. So this was self-interest. Partly, but not entirely. Vasquez paused, choosing her words carefully. Admiral Syrath, when we received your distress call, there was debate among our leadership. Some argued that we should stay hidden. Let the Confederation fall. Use the time to strengthen our own defenses. It was the logical choice. But you did not make that choice. No, because logic is not the only thing that matters. Vasquez stood and walked to the window, looking out at the debris field. The Confederation reached out to us, even though you thought we were primitives. Nah, you asked for help from species you considered inferior. That took humility. That took desperation. But more than that, it took trust. She turned back to face Syrath. You trusted that we would try to help. You trusted that even primitives might have something to offer. That kind of trust is rare in this galaxy. It deserves to be rewarded. Syrath felt something shift in his chest. It was hope, he realized. Real hope. For the first time in years. There was another reason, Vasquez continued. A reason that my people understand better than most. What reason? Survival is not enough. Vasquez's voice was quiet but intense. My species has survived many things. Ice ages that lasted 10,000 years. Plagues that killed half our population. Wars that burned our cities to ash. We survived because we refused to give up. But survival alone means nothing if there is nothing worth surviving for. She gestured at the stars outside the window. This galaxy is full of species that have forgotten how to hope. They accept that the strong rule and the weak suffer. They believe that might makes right. They have given up on the idea that things could be different. The Confederation tried to be different, Syrath said softly. Yes, you tried to build something based on cooperation instead of conquest. You failed, but you tried. And that matters. That matters more than you know. Vasquez returned to her seat. Humanity decided to help the Confederation because we believe in what you were trying to build. A galaxy where species work together, where strength is used to protect, not to dominate, where there is hope for something better. And now we rebuild, Tana, together. Syrath felt tears forming in his eyes. He had not cried in decades. He had trained himself to be strong, to be stoic, to bear the weight of command without showing weakness. But this was different. This was not weakness. This was relief. This was gratitude. This was the feeling of a crushing weight being lifted after carrying it for so long. Admiral Vasquez, he said, I do not know how to thank you. My people, we had given up. We were waiting to die. And you saved us. You saved yourselves, Vasquez replied. You fought for 15 years against impossible odds. You never surrendered. You kept your civilization alive when anyone else would have collapsed. That is why we came. You proved that you were worth saving. There was a long silence. The two admirals sat together, looking out at the stars. And the debris field was slowly dispersing, the remnants of the Kreth fleet scattering into the void. It was the end of an era, the beginning of something new. What happens now? Syrath asked finally. The Kreth will not accept this defeat. They will rebuild. They will come back. Yes, Vasquez agreed. They will. But they will not find the same galaxy waiting for them. The Confederation will have new technology, new weapons, new allies. Humanity. Humanity. And anyone else who wants to build a better future. Vasquez smiled, and for the first time, it was a warm smile, without calculation or hidden meaning. Admiral Syrath, I have a proposal for you. I am listening. The war is not over. The Kreth still hold most of their territory. They still have hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, millions of subjects under their control. And defeating their main fleet was just the beginning. You want to continue the war. I want to finish it, not just push the Kreth back, but end their empire entirely, free the species they have conquered, destroy their ability to threaten anyone ever again. Syrath considered this. It was an ambitious goal, perhaps an impossible goal. The Kreth dominion was vast, spanning hundreds of systems. Even with human technology, conquering them completely would take years, decades perhaps. But it was also the right goal, the only goal worth pursuing. The Confederation Council will need to approve any continued alliance, Syrath said. But I believe they will agree. We have been fighting this war for 15 years. We always knew we were going to lose. Now for the first time, we have a chance to win. And they will not pass up that chance. Good. Vasquez extended her hand. It was a human gesture, Sirath knew, a ritual for sealing agreements. He took her hand in his. Her grip was strong and steady. Admiral Vasquez, he said, on behalf of the Valanthi Confederation, I accept your proposal. We will fight together. We will win together. And we will build something better from the ashes of the old order. Welcome to the Alliance, Admiral Sirath. Outside the window, the stars shone cold and bright. Somewhere out there, the surviving Kreth were fleeing back to their territory, carrying news of their defeat. They would tell their masters what had happened. They would describe the human ships that shrugged off energy weapons and killed with primitive kinetic guns. They would speak of the end of Kreth's supremacy, and the galaxy would listen. In every species that had cowered under Kreth rule, every civilization that had accepted domination as inevitable, every being who had given up hope would hear the news. The Kreth could be beaten. The strong were not invincible. There was another way. It was the beginning of a revolution, and humanity was leading the charge. In her quarters aboard the unconquered sun, Admiral Vasquez sat alone and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. The public face she showed to allies was always strong, always confident, but in private she could admit the truth. She was tired. She had been carrying the weight of this mission for years, knowing that if she failed, humanity's secret would be exposed for nothing. But she had not failed. The battle had gone exactly as planned. The Kreth weapons had been useless against human armor. Human railguns had torn through Kreth shields like paper. Everything her scientists had predicted, everything her strategists had planned, had worked perfectly. Now came the hard part. Winning a battle was one thing. Winning a war was something else entirely. The Kreth would adapt. They would study human technology and find countermeasures. They would build new weapons, new defenses. The advantage humanity had today would not last forever. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today she could celebrate. Today she could take pride in what her people had accomplished. Her communication console beeped. She reached over and activated it. Admiral, said the voice of her communications officer, we are receiving messages from all over the galaxy. News of the battle is spreading. Everyone wants to know more about humanity. Let them wonder for now, Vasquez replied. We will make official announcements soon enough. Yes, Admiral. There is one message that I think you should see personally. It is from Earth, from the President. Vasquez sat up straighter. Put it through. The screen flickered and the face of President Chen appeared. She was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, the leader of humanity for the past 12 years. She looked tired but pleased. Admiral Vasquez, she said, I have been watching the battle reports. Outstanding work. You have made humanity proud. Thank you, Madam President. The credit belongs to the crew. They performed flawlessly. They did. And so did you. But I am not calling just to offer congratulations. I am calling because things are about to change. Yes, and we need to discuss our next steps. Vasquez nodded. She had expected this conversation. The galaxy knows about us now. We cannot hide anymore. Exactly. For 200 years, we have stayed in the shadows, building our strength, waiting for the right moment. That moment has arrived. The question is, what do we do with it? I have already begun discussions with the Confederation leadership. They are receptive to a continued alliance. Good. But the Confederation is just the beginning. There are hundreds of species in this galaxy. Many of them are suffering under Kreth rule or living in fear of Kreth expansion. They need to know that there is an alternative. You want to expand the alliance? I want to build something new, not just a military coalition, but a new order. A galactic community based on cooperation instead of domination. The Confederation tried to create something like this and failed because they did not have the strength to defend it. We do. Vasquez considered this. It was a massive undertaking. Building a new galactic order would require diplomacy, resources, time, and patience. It would mean dealing with species that had never trusted anyone, convincing them that humanity was different from every other power they had encountered. But it was also the reason humanity had waited so long to reveal itself. Not just to survive, to lead. I understand, Madam President. What are my orders? For now, secure the alliance with the Confederation. Make them understand that we are committed to their survival. Once that is done, we will begin reaching out to other species. The Kreth have enemies everywhere. We need to find them and bring them together. It will not be easy. Many species will be suspicious of us. They will wonder if we are just another empire looking for conquest. Then we will have to prove them wrong. With actions, not words. President Chen leaned closer to the screen. Admiral, you fought today because you believed it was the right thing to do. Not because it was easy or safe, but because it was right. That is what makes humanity different. That is what will make others trust us. Yes, Madam President. Good luck, Admiral. The galaxy is watching. Show them who we are. The screen went dark. Vasquez sat in the silence of her quarters, thinking about everything that lay ahead. The war was not over. It was just beginning. But for the first time, she believed they could actually win. She stood and walked to her window. Outside, the stars blazed in the darkness. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were waking up to a new reality. The Kreth could be beaten. Hope was possible. The future was not written yet. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same. Supreme Commander Vorthax had never known fear. From his earliest memories, he had been raised to believe that fear was weakness, and weakness was death. The Kreth way was simple: dominate or be dominated. There was no room for fear in that philosophy, only strength, only victory. But as his flagship fled through the darkness of space, surrounded by the shattered remnants of his once mighty fleet, Vorthax felt something cold and terrible settling in his chest. It was not quite fear. It was worse. It was the understanding that everything he believed had been proven wrong. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was chaos. Officers shouted damage reports. Emergency lights flickered. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. Somewhere in the depths of the ship, teams were working frantically to repair the damage from a human projectile that had torn through the outer hull and killed 30 crew members before embedding itself in a storage bay. They had been lucky. If the projectile had hit a few meters to the left, it would have struck the reactor. The Eternal Dominion would have joined the hundreds of other ships that were now nothing but debris drifting through the Arcturus Nebula. How many did we lose? Vorthax demanded. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that his officers had never heard before. Final count is still being compiled, Commander, Drath replied. The tactical officer's hands were shaking as he worked his console. But initial estimates suggest we lost over 300 vessels. Another 200 are heavily damaged and may not survive the journey home. 300 ships. Half his fleet, gone in minutes. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was the worst defeat in Kreth history. And the humans? Vorthax asked. How many of them did we destroy? Drath was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. None, Commander. Our weapons did not destroy a single human vessel. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Vorthax felt the eyes of every officer on the bridge turned to him, waiting to see how he would react. In the Kreth military, failure was punished with death. A commander who lost half his fleet would normally be executed by his own subordinates. But not today. Today they were all too stunned, too confused, too broken to think about tradition. They had seen something that defied everything they knew about warfare. They had watched their weapons, the most advanced in the galaxy, splash harmlessly against primitive ships. They had witnessed their shields, which had never failed before, be penetrated like they did not exist. They wanted answers. They wanted someone to explain what had happened, and Vorthax had no answers to give. Set course for home, he ordered. Maximum speed. We need to reach Dominion space before they can pursue. Commander, one of the officers said hesitantly, what do we tell the High Council? How do we explain this? Vorthax turned to look at him. Because the officer was young, barely old enough to serve on a command ship. He had probably never seen real combat before today. Now he had seen something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. We tell them the truth, Vorthax said. The humans are not what we thought. They have weapons that ignore our shields. They have defenses that ignore our weapons. We attacked them with everything we had, and it was not enough. The Council will not accept that explanation. They will say you failed. I did fail, Vorthax admitted. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. We all failed. We have been fighting wars the same way for 10,000 years, and we assumed that no one could challenge us. We were wrong. The bridge fell silent. The Eternal Dominion continued its flight through space, its engines straining to put as much distance as possible between them and the humans. Behind them, the debris of their fleet spread across the void like a monument to their defeat. Vorthax walked to the main view screen and stared out at the stars. Somewhere behind them, The human fleet was probably celebrating. They had achieved something that no one else in the galaxy had ever managed. They had broken the Kreth war machine. He thought about what this would mean for the Dominion. For 10,000 years, his people had built their civilization on conquest. They had taken what they wanted because no one could stop them. They had enslaved other species because they were strong enough to do so. Strength was the only virtue that mattered. Victory was the only measure of worth. But what happened when strength failed? What happened when victory was no longer possible? The Dominion had no answer to that question. They had never needed one. Across the galaxy, news of the battle was spreading like wildfire. Communication networks that had been built to connect thousands of worlds now carried a single message. The Kreth had been defeated. The unbeatable empire had been beaten. The galaxy was changing. On the slave world of Telos 4, a Mirandi worker heard the news from a fellow prisoner who had intercepted a transmission. The Mirandi was old, worn down by years of labor in the Kreth factories. He had long ago given up hope of ever being free. But when he heard what the humans had done, something stirred in his chest that he had almost forgotten. It was hope. Dangerous, wonderful hope. On the trading station of Nexus Prime, merchants and travelers gathered around display screens showing footage of the battle. They watched human ships absorb Kreth weapons fire without flinching. They watched Kreth dreadnoughts explode one after another, killed by weapons that no one had seen in 10,000 years. They whispered to each other in amazement and fear. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? What did they want? On a hidden asteroid base deep in uncharted space, a group of rebels who had been fighting the Kreth for decades gathered to watch the same footage. They had been reduced to hit-and-run attacks, stealing supplies and disrupting communications. They had believed their cause was doomed, that they would eventually be hunted down and destroyed. Now they saw possibility. The Kreth could be beaten. The Empire could fall. There was a chance. And on Earth, humanity's homeworld, a young child watched the news with her parents. She did not understand all of it. She did not know what a railgun was or why armor was better than shields. But she understood one thing. Her people had done something amazing. They had helped others who needed help. They had stood up against bullies who thought they could not be stopped. She felt proud. She felt brave. She felt like anything was possible. Admiral Vasquez received reports of these reactions over the following days. Her intelligence officers had tapped into communication networks across the galaxy, monitoring how different species were responding to the battle. The picture that emerged was encouraging. The Kreth had ruled through fear. They had convinced everyone that resistance was futile, that their technology was unbeatable, or that submission was the only path to survival. In a single battle, humanity had shattered that illusion. The fear was still there, but it was no longer absolute. It was mixed with something else now. Hope. The Confederation Council is requesting a formal meeting, her aide reported. They want to discuss the alliance in detail. What we expect, what we can offer, how we plan to proceed. Schedule it for tomorrow, Vasquez replied. I want our diplomatic team present, and make sure they understand that we are not here to take over. We are here to help. Yes, Admiral, there is also something else. We have been receiving messages from other species that are not part of the Confederation. They want to know more about us. Some of them are asking for help. Vasquez nodded slowly. This was expected. The galaxy was vast, and the Kreth had enemies everywhere. Many species had been conquered and enslaved. Others had been isolated, hiding in remote corners of space to avoid Dominion attention. Now they were reaching out, hoping that humanity might be their salvation. Compile the messages, she ordered. Organize them by priority. Species under immediate threat first, then potential allies, then everyone else. We will respond to each one individually. That could take months, Admiral. Then we had better get started. The work began. Human diplomats and military advisors fanned out across the galaxy, meeting with species that had never encountered humans before. They brought technology and weapons. Yes, but they also brought something more important. A vision. A promise that things could be different. That the strong did not have to prey on the weak. That civilizations could work together instead of against each other. Not everyone believed them. Many species were suspicious, convinced that humanity was just another empire looking for conquest. They had seen too many powers rise and fall, each one promising peace while preparing for war. Why should humans be any different? Vasquez understood their skepticism. She had expected it. The only way to overcome it was through action. Humanity would have to prove itself day by day, decision by decision. It would take time, it would take patience, but she believed it could be done. Meanwhile, the war continued. The Kreth had retreated to their core territories, but they were not defeated. They still controlled hundreds of systems, billions of subjects, and thousands of ships. The losses at Arcturus had been devastating. But the Dominion was vast. They could rebuild. More importantly, they were adapting. Reports came in of Kreth scientists working frantically to understand human technology. They were analyzing debris from the battle, studying the composition of human armor, trying to reverse engineer the railguns that had torn through their fleet. They knew that their current weapons were useless, so they were trying to create new ones. Vasquez was not surprised. The Kreth had not built an empire by being stupid. They would learn from their defeat. They would evolve. The advantage humanity had now would not last forever. That was why speed was essential. They needed to press the attack before the Kreth could recover. Every system liberated was a system that could no longer contribute to the Dominion war machine. And every slave freed was a potential recruit for the Alliance. Every victory weakened the enemy and strengthened the cause. The first target was the Orion sector, the agricultural heartland that had fallen to the Kreth early in the war. It was defended by a garrison of 200 ships, a substantial force but nothing compared to the fleet that had been destroyed at Arcturus. Vasquez led the assault personally. The human fleet, now reinforced with Confederation vessels that had been upgraded with human technology, entered the sector in perfect formation. The Kreth defenders scrambled to meet them. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Kreth had learned nothing from Arcturus. Their ships still relied on energy weapons and energy shields. They still tried the same tactics that had failed so completely before. Plasma lances splashed uselessly against human armor. Particle beams dispersed without effect. The Kreth fought bravely, but bravery was not enough. Human railguns tore through the garrison in minutes. Ship after ship exploded. Their shields useless, their hulls shredded by kinetic impacts. The Kreth commander tried to order a retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The human fleet had surrounded them, cutting off every escape route. When it was over, not a single Kreth vessel remained. The Orion sector was liberated. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. Human fleets, supported by growing numbers of allied ships, struck at Kreth holdings wherever they could be found. Some battles were easy, against isolated garrisons that had not yet received word of the new threat. Others were harder, against forces that had begun to adapt. The Kreth were learning. They developed new weapons, kinetic projectile systems modeled on human technology. They designed new armor, attempting to replicate the materials that made human ships so durable. They changed their tactics, focusing on evasion and ambush rather than direct confrontation. But they were always one step behind. Human technology had been developing for 2 centuries while the rest of the galaxy stagnated. The gap was too large to close quickly. Every innovation the Kreth produced was countered by something humanity had developed decades ago. Months passed, then years. The Alliance grew as more species joined, drawn by human victories and the promise of freedom. The Confederation, once on the verge of collapse, was stronger than it had ever been. New shipyards produced fleets of hybrid vessels, not combining human weapons with alien designs. New armies marched across occupied worlds, liberating populations that had lived under Kreth rule for generations. And through it all, Vorthax watched from his command post deep in Dominion territory. He had survived the Battle of Arcturus. He had survived the political aftermath, the accusations of failure, the demands for his execution. He had convinced the High Council that he was still useful, that his experience fighting the humans made him valuable. They had given him command of the defense forces, tasked with holding the line against the unstoppable human advance. It was a hopeless assignment. Every battle ended the same way. Human ships absorbed Kreth weapons and returned fire with devastating effect. The new Kreth weapons were better than the old ones, but they were not good enough. The new armor helped, but not enough. The humans were simply better. Vorthax had spent his entire life believing in Kreth superiority. His species was stronger, smarter, more advanced than any other. That was the foundation of everything he knew, and it was wrong. The humans were not superior in any obvious way. Their ships were ugly. Their culture was strange. They did not conquer for the joy of domination or the accumulation of power. They fought for ideas, abstract concepts like freedom and cooperation and hope, and they were winning. Vorthax stood at his command console and watched the latest reports scroll across his screen. Another sector fallen, another fleet destroyed, another system liberated. The Dominion was shrinking day by day, its territory eaten away by an enemy it could not stop. He thought about the future. In a year, well, maybe two, the humans would reach the Kreth homeworld. They would bring their unstoppable ships and their strange weapons, and they would demand surrender. And the Dominion would have no choice but to comply, because the alternative was extinction. 10,000 years of conquest, 10,000 years of glory. And it would all end because of one species that refused to accept that it was supposed to lose. Vorthax almost admired them. Almost. He pulled up an old recording, one he had watched many times since Arcturus. It showed the battle from his ship's sensors, the human fleet advancing, the Kreth weapons firing, the shields collapsing, and then the return fire, the kinetic rounds that tore through his ships like they were made of paper. He paused the recording at the moment of the first Kreth ship's destruction, 4 seconds from impact to death. 4 seconds was all it took to kill a vessel that had taken years to build. 4 seconds was all it took to prove that everything the Kreth believed was a lie. "Commander," Drath's voice interrupted his thoughts. "There is a communication incoming. It is from the human fleet." Vorthax felt his heart skip a beat. The humans had never contacted him directly before. All negotiations had gone through the Alliance's diplomatic channels. "Put it through." The screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was an older female with gray hair and tired eyes. Vorthax recognized her from intelligence reports. Admiral Vasquez, the architect of his defeat. "Supreme Commander Vorthax," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Howdy, I hope this message reaches you in good health." "What do you want?" Vorthax asked. He saw no point in pleasantries. "I want to offer you a choice. The war is nearly over. Your fleets are destroyed. Your territories are falling one by one. Within a year, perhaps less, we will reach your homeworld. When that happens, you will have to surrender or die. Then we will die. The Kreth do not surrender. I know that is what you believe. I know your culture teaches that submission is worse than death. But I am not asking you to submit. I am asking you to evolve." Vorthax stared at the screen. "Explain." "The galaxy is changing, Commander. The old ways are ending. The strong dominating the weak, conquest and slavery and endless war. It does not have to be that way. There is another path. Cooperation, equality, and the fantasies of the Confederation? Not fantasies, reality. Look at what we have built in just a few years. Species that were enemies are now allies. Worlds that were dying are now thriving. The Alliance is stronger than any empire because it is based on mutual respect instead of fear. And what role would the Kreth play in this alliance? Servants? Laborers? We would never accept such humiliation. You would play the same role as everyone else. Partners, contributors. Your people have skills and resources that would benefit the Alliance. In return, you would receive protection, trade, access to technology, a chance to build something better than what you have now." Vorthax was quiet for a long moment. Part of him wanted to reject the offer immediately. Everything in his training screamed that this was a trap, a sign of weakness, a ploy to make the Kreth lower their guard. But another part of him, a part he had tried to suppress since Arcturus, whispered that she might be right. The old ways had failed. 10,000 years of conquest had led to this. Defeat, humiliation, the destruction of everything his people had built. Perhaps it was time to try something different. "I cannot make this decision alone," he said finally. "The High Council would have to approve." "I understand. Take this message to them. Tell them that humanity offers peace, not conquest. Tell them that there is a place for the Kreth in the new galaxy if they choose to take it. And if they refuse," Vasquez's face was unreadable, "then we will do what we must. But I hope it does not come to that. There has been enough death already." The transmission ended. Vorthax sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. He had a decision to make, a message to deliver, a future to determine. For the first time in his life, he did not know what the right choice was. 2 years after the Battle of Arcturus, the war ended. It did not end with a final dramatic battle or the destruction of the Kreth homeworld. It ended in a council chamber on a neutral station where representatives of the Galactic Alliance sat across from the remaining leaders of the Kreth Dominion. Vorthax was there, though he was no longer Supreme Commander. That title had been taken from him by the High Council, who blamed him for the defeats that had broken their empire. He did not care about the title anymore. He had stopped caring about many things in the past 2 years. Watching your entire civilization crumble had a way of changing your perspective. Admiral Vasquez was there as well, representing humanity. She looked older than she had at Arcturus, her hair whiter, her face more lined. The war had been hard on everyone, even the victors, especially the victors. The treaty was simple. The Kreth Dominion would surrender all conquered territories. They would free all enslaved populations. They would reduce their military to a defense force only, with strict limits on ship numbers and weapon systems. In exchange, they would be allowed to keep their homeworld and their core systems. They would not be destroyed or occupied. They would have a chance to rebuild. It was a generous offer, far more generous than the Kreth would have given to a defeated enemy. Many in the alliance had argued for harsher terms. The Kreth had committed terrible crimes during their centuries of expansion. Millions had died. Entire species had been enslaved or exterminated. Justice demanded punishment, but Vasquez had pushed for mercy, not because she was soft or naive, but because she understood something that her critics did not. Punishment created resentment. Resentment created conflict. If the Alliance wanted lasting peace, it needed to offer the Kreth a path forward, a reason to change rather than a reason to seek revenge. The Kreth High Council had debated for weeks before accepting the terms. Many had wanted to fight to the death, preferring extinction to surrender. But in the end, pragmatism won out. The Dominion was broken. Their fleets were destroyed. Their territories were gone. Fighting on would accomplish nothing except the death of their species. So they signed the treaty. The war was over. Vasquez did not celebrate, and she was too tired for celebration. She returned to her ship and sat in her quarters, staring out at the stars. 2 years of constant warfare. Thousands of battles, millions of lives lost on both sides. And for what? A better galaxy, she told herself. A chance for something new. But the cost had been staggering. There was a knock at her door. She straightened in her chair and called out, "Enter." Admiral Cyrath stepped into the room. He was different from the young officer she had met at Arcturus. The war had aged him, given him a gravity that had not been there before. He commanded the Confederation fleet now, the largest single force in the Alliance after the human navy. "Admiral Vasquez," he said, "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Not at all. Please sit." Cyrath took a seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. They had fought together for 2 years. They had shared victories and defeats, triumphs and tragedies. There was a bond between them that went beyond rank or species. "The treaty is signed," Cyrath said finally. "The war is over, but I find myself unable to feel joy." "I understand. It does not feel like victory. It feels like survival." "Yes, exactly." Cyrath looked out the window at the stars. "I keep thinking about all the people who died, all the ships we lost, all the worlds that were destroyed. We won, but the cost was so high." Vasquez nodded slowly. "That is the nature of war. Even when you win, you lose something. The question is whether what you gain was worth what you lost." "And was it?" Vasquez considered the question carefully. It was not a simple one. 2 years ago, she had led a fleet into battle against overwhelming odds. She had gambled everything on the belief that human technology could turn the tide. She had been right, but being right had meant war on a scale the galaxy had never seen. "I think so," she said finally. "The Kreth would have conquered everyone eventually. They would have enslaved or destroyed every species that was not Kreth. We stopped that from happening. We saved billions of lives, even if we could not save everyone. And now? What happens now? Now we build. The Alliance is strong, but it is also new. The species that came together to fight the Kreth are still learning to work together. There will be disagreements. There will be conflicts. Peace is harder than war in some ways." Cyrath smiled slightly. "You do not paint an encouraging picture. I paint an honest one. But I believe we can succeed. Humanity has spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment, not just building weapons and ships, but developing the skills to lead. We understand diplomacy. We understand cooperation. We understand that lasting peace requires more than military strength. That is why you offered the Kreth such generous terms." "Exactly. They are not evil, Cyrath. They are not monsters. They are a species that built their civilization on a flawed philosophy. If we give them a chance to change, many of them will take it. In a generation or 2, The Kreth could become valuable members of the Alliance. Sirath looked skeptical. That is a very optimistic view. Perhaps, but optimism is what has kept humanity going through dark times. We believe that things can get better. We believe that people can change. We believe that the future is not determined by the past. And if you are wrong, if the Kreth refuse to change, then we will deal with that. But I would rather try for the best outcome than assume the worst. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars. Finally, Sirath stood. I should return to my ship. There is much work to be done. The Confederation Council is meeting tomorrow to discuss the transition to peacetime governance. I look forward to working with them. Vasquez stood as well and extended her hand. Admiral Sirath, it has been an honor serving alongside you. Sirath took her hand. The honor is mine, Admiral Vasquez. Humanity saved my people. We will not forget that. He left. Vasquez sat back down and returned to her contemplation of the stars. The war was over, but her work was not. As the leader of humanity's military forces, she would play a key role in shaping the new galactic order. There would be trade agreements to negotiate, disputes to mediate, crises to manage. The Alliance would face challenges that no one could predict. Her job was to make sure it survived. She thought about Earth. She had not been home in years. Her family was there, waiting for her. Her grandchildren had been born during the war. She had never held them. Perhaps soon. Perhaps when things stabilized, she could take a leave and visit home. Walk the streets of her childhood city. See the mountains and the oceans. Remember what she was fighting for. But not yet. There was still too much to do. The months that followed were difficult but hopeful. The Alliance established a new governing body, the Galactic Council, now with representatives from every member species. Humanity held a prominent position, but Vasquez had insisted that they not dominate. The council was designed to be democratic, with each species having a voice. The transition was not smooth. Species that had been enemies for generations struggled to work together. Old grievances surfaced. New conflicts emerged. There were moments when it seemed like the Alliance would tear itself apart before it had a chance to flourish. But it survived. Slowly, painfully, the different species learned to trust each other. They built trade networks and shared technology. They established peacekeeping forces to handle disputes. They created schools where young beings from different worlds could learn together. The Kreth surprisingly adapted better than many had expected. The younger generation, those who had grown up during the defeat, were more open to change than their elders. They saw that the old ways had led to disaster. They wanted something different. Not all of them, of course. There were hardliners who refused to accept the new order, who plotted rebellion and dreamed of revenge. But they were a minority, growing smaller each year. Most Kreth simply wanted to live their lives, raise their families, and find their place in the new galaxy. Vorthax was one of them. After the treaty was signed, he had retired from military service. He had no taste for politics, and the High Council wanted nothing to do with him. So he returned to his homeworld and tried to find a new purpose. It was not easy. He had spent his entire life as a warrior. He did not know how to be anything else. For the first year, he drifted, when lost and purposeless. Then he was approached by a human diplomat. She was young, idealistic, full of the boundless energy that humans seem to possess. She asked if he would be willing to speak at a conference about the war, to share the Kreth perspective on what had happened. He refused at first. Why would anyone want to hear from a defeated commander? What could he possibly say that would matter? But she persisted. She explained that understanding the enemy's point of view was essential for lasting peace, that former opponents could become teachers, helping others avoid the mistakes of the past, that his experience was valuable, not shameful. Eventually he agreed. He stood before an audience of hundreds, species from across the galaxy, and told them about the war. Not the battles and the strategies, but the beliefs that had driven the Kreth to conquer, the philosophy that had made them see other species as inferior, the blindness that had led to their downfall. He spoke about what it was like to watch everything you believed in collapse, to realize that your entire civilization had been built on a lie, to face the choice between clinging to the past and embracing an uncertain future. When he finished, there was silence. Then slowly, applause. Beings who had lost friends and family to the Kreth war machine were applauding a Kreth commander. It was strange. It was surreal. It was perhaps the beginning of something new. After the conference, the young human diplomat found him again. She thanked him for speaking. She said that his words had meant something to people who were struggling to forgive. Vorthax asked her why humanity had been so generous to its enemies, why they had offered peace instead of revenge, why they were trying so hard to build a galaxy that included everyone, even those who had tried to destroy them. She smiled and said one word: stubborn. Vorthax did not understand at first. The human explained. Her species had survived by refusing to give up, by clinging to hope when all seemed lost, by believing that things could get better, no matter how dark they seemed. That stubbornness extended to how they treated others. Humans did not give up on people any more than they gave up on themselves. They believed that enemies could become friends, that societies could change, that the future was not determined by the past. It was naive, perhaps, foolish certainly by Kreth standards, but it was also working. The alliance was stronger than any empire had ever been because it was built on cooperation instead of fear. Species that would never have worked together were now allies, united by common goals and mutual respect. Vorthax thought about this for a long time. In the end, he came to a conclusion that would have shocked his younger self. The humans were right, not about everything. They were strange and confusing and often made no sense. But they were right about the most important thing, that strength alone was not enough, that conquest led to defeat, that the only way to build something lasting was to build it together. He became an advocate for cooperation. He traveled across the former Dominion, speaking to Kreth communities about the new galaxy. He told them that surrender did not mean submission, or that working with others did not mean becoming weak. That change was not the same as defeat. Some listened, others did not. But the ones who listened began to change, and they in turn changed others. Slowly, year by year, the Kreth became part of the Alliance instead of just subjects of it. 20 years after the Battle of Arcturus, the galaxy was almost unrecognizable. Species that had been at war for centuries now traded freely. Worlds that had been devastated by conflict had been rebuilt. Children of former enemies played together, learning each other's languages, sharing each other's cultures. Admiral Vasquez, now long retired, returned to the stars one final time. She had been asked to give a speech at the 20th anniversary celebration of the Alliance. It would be held at Arcturus Station, was built on the site of the battle that had changed everything. The station was enormous, a testament to what the allied species could accomplish when they worked together. Millions of beings lived there, representing hundreds of worlds. It was a symbol of the new galaxy, a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Vasquez stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. She saw Valanthi and Mirandi and Teth. She saw Kreth and humans and dozens of species she had never encountered before. She saw the future. 20 years ago, she began, humanity entered the war zone. Our shields collapsed in seconds. The enemy did not last a minute. There was laughter from the crowd. The story had become legendary, retold countless times, embellished and exaggerated until it was as much myth as history. But that is not the real story, Vasquez continued. The real story is not about shields or weapons or technology. The real story is about what happened next. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. After the battle, we had a choice. We could have used our power to conquer, just as the Kreth had done. We could have built an empire on the ashes of the old order. We would have been strong, we would have been feared, and we would have failed, just as every empire before us failed. Instead, we chose a different path. We chose to share our strength instead of hoarding it. We chose to lift up our allies instead of standing on their backs. We chose to believe that a galaxy united was stronger than a galaxy divided. It was not easy. There were moments when it seemed impossible. There were times when we wanted to give up, to retreat to our borders and let the rest of you sort out your own problems. But we did not give up. We are human. We are stubborn. More laughter. The word had become famous, a shorthand for everything that made humanity different. 20 years later, look at what we have built. Not an empire, but a community. Not subjects, but partners. This station, this celebration, all of you standing here together, this is what humanity was working toward all along. Not conquest, not domination. Connection. Vasquez felt tears forming in her eyes. She was old now, older than she had ever expected to be. But she was proud of what her people had accomplished, proud of the galaxy they had helped create. I will not live to see what this alliance becomes in 100 years or 1,000, but I believe it will endure. I believe it will grow. I believe that the beings of this galaxy will continue to find ways to work together, to overcome their differences, to build something greater than any one species could achieve alone. That is humanity's gift to the galaxy, not our weapons or our armor. Our belief that tomorrow can be better than today, our refusal to accept that conflict is inevitable. Our stubborn, foolish, wonderful hope. She stepped back from the podium. The crowd erupted in applause, beings of every species cheering together. Vasquez smiled and waved, then turned and walked slowly off the stage. Sirath was waiting for her in the wings. He was old too, his scales faded, his movements slow, but his eyes were still sharp, still full of the intelligence that had served him so well. "That was a good speech," he said. "It was true," Vasquez replied. "Well, that is all that matters." They walked together toward the observation deck, where they could look out at the stars. The galaxy stretched before them, vast and mysterious and full of possibility. "Do you remember what you said to me after the battle?" Sirath asked. "When I asked what made humanity different," Vasquez thought back. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "I said we were stubborn." "Yes, I did not understand at the time. I thought it was a joke, or perhaps a mistranslation. And now?" Sirath was quiet for a moment. "Now I understand. Stubbornness is not just refusing to give up. It is refusing to accept that the world cannot change. It is continuing to push forward even when everyone says it is impossible. It is believing in the future even when the present is dark." "That is a good definition. It is what saved us. What saved all of us." Sirath turned to look at her. "Thank you, Elena, for everything." Vasquez smiled. In all their years of working together, he had never called her by her first name. It felt right somehow, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. "Thank you, Sirath, for trusting us, for giving us a chance to prove ourselves." They stood together, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships still patrolled, keeping the peace. Somewhere out there, species that had been enemies were learning to be friends. Somewhere out there, children were growing up in a galaxy that was safer and kinder than the one their parents had known. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And better was worth fighting for. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had helped make it happen. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.